Hello and welcome to the Strong Suit Podcast, where we focus on the people part of your business. Every single episode, I feature a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with Rockstars. And I am so pumped to speak with my guest today, Matt McCambridge. Now, Matt is the CEO and co-founder of an innovative healthcare company based in New York City called Eden Health. And before I tell you about Eden, let me tell you a bit about Matt, because it's a very interesting background. You don't see a lot of successful venture capitalists become successful entrepreneurs. In a lot of cases, it's just a very different skill set, a very different DNA. But for some reason, Matt's been able to pull off both. He was a venture capitalist with one of the top VC firms in the world. You probably know Insight Venture Partners. That's the global venture capital and private equity firm with so much capital under management. They've invested in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies. Left Insight Venture Partners to co-found Eden Health. Now, Eden has been around about 3 years, and quite simply, they eliminate the hassle of healthcare for both employers and their employees. And it's really combines telemedicine and personalized insurance and all kinds of stuff. It's super cool. And over the next 20 minutes, we're going to talk about how Matt has done it. How are you, Matt? Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm so excited to get into this. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and obviously it's just an issue that's facing so many companies. So just give us a bit about the backstory, 60 seconds of kind of how you made that transition from venture capitalist to entrepreneur. What was it about this concept? When did the light bulb kind of go off?
Yeah, well, I could go back very, very far in my own history. Everybody's got a personal story about healthcare, and definitely no different here. Suffice to say, and maybe we'll get into it later, a close family member, when my sister, when she was about 14, started to have a series of very difficult health events. And the biggest problem in this whole experience was that nobody was there to plan for next steps. She went to over 70 different kinds of specialists, in and out of the ER over a dozen times, but nobody was actually with her through this process to help my family. It was the story of, you could get the same kinds of images done, same lab work done, same thing done every single time you go everywhere.
Right.
So
it's just maddening, right?
It's just maddening. Happily, it's a good story at the end of the day. After 4 years, we figured it out. But it took a doctor kind of went out of their way to figure it out for us and really not compensated, bring our family through the process. So this is always in the back of my head. When I was at Insight Venture Partners, I looked at every single healthcare company I could find, digging into the backgrounds of all these companies, what made them work, what made them not, and really found that employers are the most exciting buyers in healthcare.
Because they can save a lot of money if they do it the right way.
They can save a lot of money, and they want it to be good, right? Sure. They got to have people show up every day. They care about the families. You've got the dual aspect of cost and quality.
Yep.
So they became clearly the group that could change the incentive structure. And that's when my co-founder and I became obsessed with the idea of providing healthcare to employers, specifically bringing primary care into the new world of technology, virtual primary care, in-person clinics, going on site to your office and doing insurance navigation.
Got it. Now, just so I'm clear, Matt, is all of it delivered through telemedicine, or is it also in the doctor's office as well?
So it's both. And what's really important is that on the telemedicine, what we call virtual primary care, it's not a new doctor every time. It's actually a consistent clinical team. And this will go into talking about culture later. So you get the same providers every single time. They stay with you through the process. We've got people who we deal with their dermatology issues, but we also have people who we deal with cancer, and we manage all of their cancer care. That's just not possible if you get a new doctor every time. The other piece is either in our clinics. So those are our offices, Eden Health offices, or actually delivered on site at the employer. And so we go to companies that are 50 people or fewer, all the way up to several thousand employees.
And you mentioned you actually have Eden Health offices as well.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah.
Wow. So this is really online and offline.
Exactly. So from early on in a company, you had this experience of people in the headquarters, so to speak, that kind of always happens as a phrase, and people in the offices that are spread out. And so keeping that team together, and as I mentioned, it's a consistent clinical team whenever you reach out as far as one patient is concerned. That cohesiveness is really important.
Okay, so now that we understand kind of the context, thank you, and the business, let's talk about the people part of it. So first of all, roughly for the listeners, how big is the business in terms of people?
So we're 15 right now, going to about 20 very soon.
Okay. So I get, the obvious question that I'm sure a lot of listeners have is, where did you learn to hire people, right? As a VC, you probably didn't hire a ton of people. So where did you learn how to do it?
So luckily, when I was a VC, I was responsible for recruiting from where I went to college. So I did have that experience, although it's not the most robust and is pretty different recruiting to VC than recruiting here. So I think a couple things happened. One is we really spent time learning as we were growing the company about what we needed as an organization. So we were very clear when we started out, actually, as a business, that we weren't going to hire anybody until we made our first sale, me and my co-founder, Scott. And at that point, once we made the first sale, we actually understood what the product needed to be. And then we hired along those lines. So found somebody who could both do sort of the analytics as well as do customer support. And that's someone we actually knew from college. Then we found somebody who was the chief medical officer of the organization, really brought an operational experience and a knowledge of clinical care there. And then started to fill out the rest of the team. So when we were starting, it just took a lot of conversations with people, want to make sure everybody was aligned with the team, knew we were a startup, knew things were going to change. And then as we sort of found gaps in the organization, tried to fill those as proactively as we knew how.
Got it. And I'm sure there was plenty of mistakes along the way, right?
There were plenty of mistakes. Luckily, we've had a pretty good hit rate. There has been some people at the company who are no longer here. One that really just didn't work out in the organization. It was not a good fit. The startup world, especially combining that with clinical care, is different.
So let's drill into that for a second. So you
Sure.
raise a great question that I hear all the time from listeners, which is fit, right? How do I define fit? How do I interview for fit? So you don't have to name names or go into too much detail, but how do you think about fit? Or in that particular case, what was the misfit, so to speak? Where did the puzzle pieces not connect?
Yeah, so we're still evolving definitely on the thinking about fit side of things. My role as the interviewer in most of these cases, let's say engineering and clinical, is really on fit. That's basically what my job is at the end of the day, because I don't have that deep engineering background that they do. So for me, I try to talk a lot about mission. We're a mission-driven organization. It's super important. Our first value is patients first. And so you need to have a compelling reason why you're in healthcare. There's some maddening aspects to it that you really wouldn't be able to get through unless you're excited about that. So
you're looking for a personal connection to the mission.
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be personal, but yes, if that's a great one too. It doesn't have to be like your family member was injured, but it could be, man, I think it's the most important sector in the US economy. That's kind of how my co-founder got into it, actually, and just obsessed with trying to make it better. So that fit piece is really important. The other side of things is that we have an informal value that we sometimes talk about, which is jokes as an organization. So it's like kind of you have to bring a sense of humor to it. And frankly, if people don't enjoy that kind of environment, and there are people who don't, then it's not going to be a good fit for them. So you have to kind of give them enough exposure. We have them meet with a lot of team members throughout the process to make both the candidate and us understand whether or not there's a good connection.
That's the first one I get. The second one, jokes and humor, is a very interesting one. You wouldn't expect it at a healthcare company.
Right.
Why is that? Were you like a class clown or a comedian or what? Tell us why that's part of it.
Yeah, well, so first off, those are one of our informal values of jokes. So we have 5 core ones on our website, and you would find that one jokes talked about more on the weekend review meetings. But I think part of that is in healthcare in particular, if you're a clinician, it can be a very isolating experience. A lot of the clinicians that you encounter in your day-to-day world going to the doctor, those people really don't interact with a lot of other team members. You're starting to see some of that change, but it's a solitary experience. So you need to figure out some way to make people passionate about it. And as an employee, if I don't feel like I can connect to somebody, or as an employee or a patient, I should say, if I don't feel like I can connect to somebody, I'm not going to have a good experience seeing that provider.
Interesting. So it's really about patient engagement and using humanity, humor,
yeah,
right? EQ and laughter is obviously a huge way to do that.
Right, exactly. And
at the right time, at the right moment.
Right. You would never make light of a situation that's serious, but you have people coming in who are really worried about a case that ends up not being that serious of a problem. So if you can make a connection from patient to provider, that makes it really strong as a way to de-escalate that care.
So how serious are you, Matt, about that as part of the DNA of Eden Health? If a great candidate comes to, let's say a candidate's referred to you by one of your venture investors. I know you've raised millions of dollars in venture capital. So Graycroft refers a great candidate, Harvard MBA, Stanford undergrad, 4.0, worked at Google, resume's amazing, talented, but they are humorless, dry, not funny, just not the kind of person you're probably going to go get a beer with. Do you pass? Is that like a non-starter?
I think that if they really didn't enjoy being around the other people in the organization, you don't have to be making hilarious jokes. I would not say that I'm the funniest person around, but if they really don't enjoy being around the other people in the organization at this small of a company, that's a problem. So, maybe when you're 50 people, you're 100 people, you start to have really different sort of aspects of the organization that are growing together, but also separately. You start to think about it a little bit differently. But if you're 25 people and you are working every day, that's very hard. You have somebody who can't stand the environment. That's not somebody who I think would be a good fit.
Got it. I think I just came up with your tagline. Eden Health, we keep our patients in stitches.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on. That was terrible. Tell me the most unique part of the recruiting process at Eden. What is the one step that you guys do at some point in the process that you think is a bit different than most companies?
It's an interesting question.
Or something that you rely on as a key indicator.
Yeah.
It could be something you do in interviews or reference checks or background checks or something like that.
Well, I would say, it's different for different positions. One of the things that we do is, and we've gotten really good feedback on this from candidates as well, is we do sort of a working session with the candidates. So, and I've heard that a lot of people, at least in startups, really don't do this. So,
it's called I call it a test drive, right? A job audition, a dry run. 91% of companies skip this step, and it's really sad, Matt, because this is the number one most predictive factor in recruiting. So I give you a ton of credit for doing it.
Right, and it's structuring something, and we take a lot of time to think about what it is. So, despite this thing about jokes as a value, we really think through things as much as we can. Structure that experience in a way that allows both sides to participate in it, but also, and not give too many guide rails to the candidate to prescribe in a way of our thinking. Give them space to think about things differently. Think about when we actually are interviewing the candidates, they don't have to have a healthcare background to complete it. So I think that's been really powerful for us. And I think it's also something that sets us apart as from the candidate's perspective as well.
Got it. And what are you looking for in that session? In other words, you have that session. What is it, like an hour, 2, 5 hours? What is it?
That's probably 2 hours embedded in a day. That's a bit longer.
Got it. So what are you looking for? So you and the team kind of debrief, right? Mm-hmm. And what do you say when the candidate is out of the room? What are you talking about in terms of how it went?
So I'll give you an example, which is kind of on my mind, which is operations role, right? So there we're looking at structured thinking, first of all. How are you taking these disparate pieces of information and bringing them together? We're looking at detail-oriented. So at this stage of the business, we're really looking for people who can get deep into the weeds of the workflow. And then we're also looking for completeness around it. So
what do you mean completeness?
So if we're giving them, let's say, one example might be rolling out a new loosely defined product. So we might say, okay, we're going to implement integrated behavioral health at one of our clinic locations, as an example. If they don't think about the transition between a primary care visit into that,
they miss 5 steps or whatever.
What are you doing?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So it's you're really, what you're describing, I think, Matt, is kind of analytical thinking, right? They don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but they got to be able to ask the right questions, look for the right data, come up with a reasonable approach, right? Of the right steps and the right sequencing. And and you don't have to know a lot about Eden Health's business to be able to do that in an interview.
Yep. Yeah, and we have a lot of, very smart folks who are at the company today. And so if you can hang in that session for 2 hours and enjoy the back and forth, another one of the values of the company is give and receive feedback. If you can enjoy that dynamic, then that's another good indicator that you're going to work well in the organization.
You're trying to make that a high pressure session or a low pressure at ease session? What is the feeling in the room when you do that?
We try to make it sort of the feel of what it would be like on a day-to-day here. So I'm not interacting in a more aggressive way necessarily than I would normally.
Got it.
So I don't think that, I think that as everyone works hard here, but I wouldn't say that we're overboard in how intense the day-to-day is, even though everyone's working pretty hard.
Got it. I understand. Very good. You mentioned earlier you're about to go from 15 people to 20. So let's talk about recruiting overall. What's kind of the number one concern on your mind when it comes to the recruiting part of Eden Health?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different things that you need we're combining as a company. So a lot of companies that are in healthcare, they go very far on tech or they go very far on clinical. So you have kind of the older school clinical organizations and the newer tech organizations, and those don't really speak to each other in a coherent way. So one of the things that we talk about in recruiting a lot is how the impact that this next person will have with regard to development of the product. So product for us combines technology and the clinical side very explicitly. So we want to have providers who are interested in talking about how does this new technology interact with my workflow? How does this affect our patients? And then we want to have engineers who want to talk to our providers and understand their needs and their issues. So I think
so in recruiting, find people that can straddle both worlds must be a real limiting factor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hiring for clinicians. Most healthcare organizations have an open slot and they'll run for 2 weeks basically, and they'll just fill that position. Yeah. So we treat it much more like an engineering hire, right? We're interviewing dozens and dozens and dozens of people for that position. Right. So I don't necessarily think it's more difficult than hiring for an engineer, but it's definitely not the way people are necessarily used to hiring in a clinical role.
Got it. I understand. We talked earlier that Eden's raised a good amount of venture capital money. Are you able to say roughly how much?
About $4
million. A lot of money. So how are your venture investors involved or not involved in the recruiting process around the business?
Oh, that's a good question. So for the hires who are more expected to have leadership positions in the organization in a traditional sense, so clinical leadership, engineering leadership, sales leadership, say, those people will have touch points with our lead investor. And that's really more about not necessarily the lead investor validating it for us. It's about that person in the team is going to have interactions with our investors, and we want to start that sooner rather than later.
Yep, got it. I understand, because they're going to have face-to-face interaction with them.
Right.
And you must get referrals from your investors as well, I assume, for some candidates.
We do.
Have you hired any?
We hired an intern.
Okay.
It was a referral from an investor, but not a full-time person so far.
Got it. Aside from referrals from your investors and your board, it's so hard to find great candidates these days, especially I'm sure in New York. Where do you find your best candidates? If you kind of think about the 15 folks on the team and you quickly kind of think about where they've come from, what were the sources?
Referrals are phenomenal, frankly.
Referrals from be specific, from whom?
From current employees.
Like employee referrals.
Yes. Nothing can really substitute somebody who has had direct experience working with somebody. It was sort of like what you were saying with doing the working sessions. Having somebody who has had experience working with that person, there's just no substitute for that. So that's great. The other side would be, frankly, there's a couple, I think Underdog actually is an organization. I don't know if you've heard those guys.
No.
That has been a good platform that we've used. We've used a few other kinds of platforms.
Yep.
And the other one is just outreach, doing
Proactive outreach.
as an organization. Yeah.
And who's doing that? Are you doing that as CEO, or do you have like a recruiter, or who spends their time making that outreach?
We have a lot of people doing it. I'll do it for certain positions that are relevant, that I'm kind of the first point of contact for. We have another person on the engineering team who would be the point person there. And then really depends on the exact position, because that first contact point is really your first conversation. So you don't want to have, I would not be as good at talking about deep in the engineering weeds in the first conversation as somebody else would.
Got it. I understand. As we start to wrap up, I'm curious, because you mentioned employee referrals. If you had to guess, what, percent of your 15 people came from employee referrals?
Probably like 3 or 4 out of 15.
Got it. And do you have a formal employee referral program where you pay a bonus or something, or is it just kind of expectation for working at Eden Health?
Right now it's an expectation. I don't want to put in everybody's mind that we need a referral bonus, but we probably will sometime soon.
Got it. I understand. Fantastic. Well, I gave you a ton of credit, Matt. This is a very difficult industry to navigate, to transform. And obviously you guys are creating something pretty unique. So congratulations. How can people learn more about Eden Health or get in touch with you?
So feel free to reach out to me at matt@edenhealth.com. If you're interested in learning more about Eden for your company, we work with companies that, again, as small as 10, 15 people, all the way up to thousands of people in the organization, and some very, very large companies. And so we work with all sorts of companies like that. And then also, feel free to visit just our website, which is edenhealth.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much for making the time today.
All right. Thank you.
And I want to remind our listeners to get ready, aim higher.